Hi, Preston of Damascus. It's Mrs. Mead again, and Sarah. We have some company today. I have another school story to read to you. Today's book is Mrs. Nelson is Back by Harry Allard. One Friday, Miss Nelson told her class that she was going to have her tonsils out. I'll be away next week, she said, and I'll expect you to behave. Yes, Miss Nelson, said the kids in 207. But at recess, it was another story. Wow, said the kids. While Miss Nelson is away, we can really act up. Not so fast, said a big kid from 309. Haven't you heard of Viola Swamp? Who? Said Miss Nelson's kids. Miss Swamp is the meanest substitute in the whole world, said the big kid. Nobody acts up when she's around. Oh, said Mrs. Nelson's kids. She's a real witch, said the big kid. Oh, said Mrs. Nelson's kid. I'll just bet you'll get the swamp, said the big kid. On Monday morning, Miss Nelson's kids were all in their seats. They were very nervous. Some of them had not slept well all weekend. If we get the swamp, I'll just die, said one of the kids. They heard footsteps in the hall. Slowly the knob turned and the door opened. It was Mr. Blansworth, the principal. I shall personally take over the class, he said. Miss Nelson's kids were so relieved, but they soon learned that Mr. Blansworth was not a lot of fun. All morning, Mr. Blansworth tried to amuse the class with his corny card tricks. Oh, brother, said the class. That afternoon, Mr. Blansworth showed off the class's favorite shadow pictures. This is kid stuff, said the class. The next day, Mr. Blansworth demonstrated his favorite bird calls. They were not a success, and for 2 days, Mr. Blansworth showed slides of his goldfish, Lucille. Mrs. Nelson's kids have never been so bored. While dusting erasers in the schoolyard, 3 of the ringleaders of 207 discussed the situation. Something will have to be done, they said. We must get rid of Blansworth. And they hatched up a plot. After school, they painted and sewed and borrowed in some old clothes, and they practiced some very difficult stunt work in the backyard. The next day, they weren't in class. That's too bad, said Mr. Blansworth. They'll miss all the excitement. Mr. Blansworth was about to show the class his collection of ballpoint pens from all over the world when someone came to the door. Slowly the knob turned and the door opened. Let's see who it could be. Oh, look, said the class. Miss Nelson is back. A tall and lumpy Miss Nelson toileted in the room. Mr. Blansworth was surprised. You're back sooner than we expected, he said. The tall and lumpy Miss Nelson didn't speak. Said the kids. Her throat must be still a little sore. Are you sure you're well enough, said Mr. Blansworth. She sure is, said the kids. Well, in that case, said the principal, I'll be getting back to the office. Nice to have you back, Mrs. Nelson. And he left the room. Hot dog, cried the class. We got rid of Blansworth. Now we can do just as we please. And at the stroke of the 10, the kids from 207 left the building. No one stopped them. They went straight to the movies. They saw The Monster That Ate Chicago Twice. This is really living, they said. Afterward, they went to Lulu's where they stuffed themselves silly, but soon they made a serious mistake. Heading back to school, they passed Mrs. Nelson's house. Miss Nelson couldn't believe her eyes. Those are my kids, she said in a scratchy voice. What are they doing out of school, and who is that with them? Mrs. Nelson telephoned Mr. Blansworth to see what was going on. You're not Miss Nelson, said Mrs. Blansworth. Miss Nelson is back. and he hung up. "Can't fool me," he said. Said Miss Nelson, "something will have to be done." And she went to her closet. What do you think she's going to pull out of that closet? Back in 2007, Mrs. Nelson's kids were spending an agreeable afternoon. They were very pleased with themselves. "We should do this more often," they said. They did not notice the figure out in the hall. Slowly the knob turned and the door opened. Who do you think it is? "My name is Viola Swamp," said the lady in the scratchy voice. "Yikes!" cried the kids. "The swamp!" "That's right," said Mrs. Swamp, "and I'm here to whip this class into shape. Get back to those desks on the double." The class did as they were told. The big kid in room from 309 was certainly right. Miss Swamp is a real witch. She knew how to get results. The class did a whole week's work in no time. She should have gotten rid of Blandsworth, they said. "Pipe down," said Swamp, or just then something under her desk attracted her attention. It was a mask. "Aha!" said Mrs. Swamp. "So that's your little game." And she tried on the mask just as Mr. Blandsworth stepped into the room. "Miss Nelson," said Blandsworth, "I'm of the opinion that someone had been impersonating you." "Uh-huh," whispered the kids. "You don't have to say," said Miss Swamp. "Probably just some kids acting up. I'm sure it won't happen again." Mr. Blandsworth left. Let's see what's going to happen next with the swamp. "And it won't, will it?" said Mrs. Swamp to the class, "because if the swamp will be watching..." A minute later, Miss Nelson appeared. "I'm back," she said. "Hot dog," cried the kids. "Are we glad to see you? Didn't you have fun with Mr. Blandsworth?" asked Mrs. Nelson. Said the kids. They decided not to mention Mrs. Viola Swamp, but they wondered why Miss Nelson hadn't seen her in the hall. And I hope you liked today's book. What do you miss about school? I'm missing all your smiling faces. Keep reading, Preston and Damascus. Bye.